Hey everybody, it's Ron from Pick Dawgz, and welcome to Week 4 of the NFL season. This is Ron's Rundown. We're going to go over all 16 games in Week 4, so if you like what you see, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Share the video to your friends, it helps us out a ton, and don't forget to put your football plays in the comments section below. I'm really interested to see what you guys are liking for Week 4, whether it be against the spread, total plays, player props, you name it. Put it in the comments section. I love reading those comments. If you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at the Premium Picks tab at pickdawgz.com. Alrighty, let's get into it. Here are the games for Week 4 of the NFL season. First up, we see your Thursday Night Football contest between the Miami Dolphins and the Cincinnati Bengals. This one, 8:15 start time on Prime Video. And when you look at the total here set at 47 points, I actually think there's still some value on the under. Unders have done pretty well in primetime games and really overall in the NFL this season. When you look at the Miami Dolphins, sure, they gave up 400-plus yards to both the Ravens and the Bills in the last 2 weeks, but one could argue those are the top two offenses right now in the AFC. Now, Cincinnati still provides another tough matchup here for Miami, but they were able to hold the Bills to 19 points in that game, and really it would have been 17 if they didn't have that butt safety at the end of that ball game. But the Dolphins defense, I still think, did a pretty good job overall, but only 212 yards of offense the Dolphins had in that game, and we saw the Bengals defense really step it up last week against the Jets in New Jersey. They had 4 sacks on the quarterback. They were really putting a lot of pressure on him. The Jets didn't really do too much offensively in that game at all, only scoring 12 points. And the Bengals still have some issues themselves in their offensive line. They haven't really been able to run the football too much. So I do see a game where we see a few sacks, we see a lot of tackle for losses, and I think we see a lower scoring ball game in the end. Give me the under in this primetime game between the Dolphins and Bengals. Next up, we see the Minnesota Vikings taking on the New Orleans Saints. We're going to see this game in London. It's going to be at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, a 9:30 Eastern start time, and it's going to be on NFL Network. And when you look at the Minnesota Vikings last week, their defense struggled yet again against the Lions. Really, in the first half, they couldn't get a stop if they tried. Now, the defense did sharpen up as that game continued, and the Vikings were able to prevail, winning the game 28-24. They did not cover in that game, and I don't really like them to cover in this game either. We've seen their defense now struggle back-to-back weeks against the Eagles on Monday Night Football, over 480 yards allowed, only 24 points allowed, but it was still an ugly performance from that defense. The secondary is struggling yet again. We saw that last season from the Vikings, and even though the Saints offense hasn't been potent quite yet this season, we did see the improvements start to get there in the second half of that game against the Panthers. At halftime, the Saints only had 162 yards of offense and no points to show for it, but by the end of the game, they put up 2 touchdowns. They had over 400 yards of offense. Jameis Winston over 300 yards passing. I do think that the Saints will be able to exploit that weak secondary for Minnesota, and even though Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson are a deadly duo, I still think the Saints compete in this game and have a good chance of winning it outright. So I'm going to take the points here with the New Orleans Saints in this London game. Next up, we see the Chicago Bears taking on the New York Giants. We're going to see one of the lower totals on the board this week in this game. And, it makes sense to me. When you look at the Chicago Bears, their offense hasn't really been explosive. They did win the game last week against the Texans 23-20, and they had over 350 yards of offense for the first time this season. But most of those yards coming on the ground, they still have not really opened up anything in the passing game. They've had less than 20 passing attempts in each of their first 3 games, and their season high in passing yards in a game was 105, and that was in week 1. The offensive line still not doing the greatest. They've given up 8 sacks in the last 2 weeks combined. Now, that's certainly the case for the New York Giants also, who struggled offensively against the Cowboys on Monday Night Football, giving up 5 sacks, only having 336 total yards of offense and 16 points in that game. Daniel Jones, he was good on the ground. They didn't really do too much in the passing game, and that does concern me, especially when you know that Sterling Shepard's going to be out for the season for the Giants. So that's a big loss for this team. Kenny Golladay has not been the receiver that many Giants fans hoped he would be. Even guys like Kadarius Toney haven't really had much of a role on this team. So a passing game that wasn't great to begin with, just lost its number 1 receiver. I don't love that for this offense. The defense has been pretty good, even though they didn't get a lot of pressure on Cooper Rush last week. It's been good against the run overall. The secondary's been inconsistent, but still overall solid performances from the Giants. I think this is going to be a lower scoring game. I don't really trust either of these offenses. Both of these defenses have stepped it up when they've needed to. So give me the under in this Bears-Giants ballgame. In our next game, we see the Cleveland Browns taking on the Atlanta Falcons. We're going to see the Browns as a small favorite in this one. The total opened up for this game at 45, and now it's up to 49.5, and I'm seeing some 50s out there. Now, we know the Browns defense is a little banged up going into this game, and that includes, unfortunately, Myles Garrett, who was in a car accident this week, and his status for this game is unclear right now. But this Browns defense is a little bit short-handed right now. When you look at the Falcons offensively, they've been able to move the ball, and they've been able to score some points, 27 points per game this season. And the defense for Atlanta, although it struggled against the pass, it's given up about 72% completion to opposing quarterbacks, not what you want to see. I still think that their ground game defense, their rush defense, has actually been pretty good, holding opponents to about 109 yards per game on the ground. We know the Browns love to run the football. I don't really trust Jacoby Brissett and the passing game to do too much on the road here. So if Atlanta's rush defense can hold up yet again this week, I think their defense will actually have some success in this game. And when you look at how their offense is done, matched with the fact that the Browns are struggling right now defensively in terms of personnel, I think the Falcons have a pretty good shot at winning this game outright. But I'll take the 1.5 points with Atlanta as the home team in this one. Next up, we see an NFC East battle between the Washington Commanders and the Dallas Cowboys. And we see the Cowboys as a 3.5-point favorite, total set at 42.5 points. This total opened up at 43. I like the under at 43. I still like it at 42.5 and 42. As you look at the Washington Commanders, there were some positives and negatives in that game against the Eagles. Obviously, a 24-8 loss is not what you want to see against your rival, but the defense definitely stepped it up in that game. Against a really good Eagles ground game, they only gave up 2.4 yards per carry and 72 rushing yards total in that one. So that's a win for the Commanders. They were able to get some pressure on Jalen Hurts. They had 3 sacks in that game. That's another win for the defense. But the offense, they struggled. 9 sacks allowed in that game. It was not pretty to watch. The ground game didn't do much. Carson Wentz had his weakest game of the season, in my opinion. And I don't think that this Commanders offense is in very good shape going into this one. Now, I think their defense competes and keeps this game pretty close, as the Cowboys offense wasn't fantastic on the road against the Giants last week. Cooper Rush wasn't his best. He completed many passes, but only 215 passing yards. The rushing offense started to get going as Zeke and Tony Pollard had a few nice runs in that game. But I think this is going to be a lower scoring game overall. I think it's one of the lower totals of the week for a reason. I like the defenses in this one, especially when you look at the Dallas Cowboys pass rush. We saw the Commanders give up 9 sacks last week. Now you got to go up against Micah Parsons and the Cowboys, who have forced 11 sacks or earned 11 sacks in the last 2 weeks, including 5 on Monday Night Football. Give me the under in this Commanders-Cowboys ballgame. Next up, we see the Detroit Lions taking on the Seattle Seahawks. Now, the Detroit Lions are 4.5-point favorites, a total set at 50 points, and we don't see the Lions as favorites very often these days, and we especially don't see them favored by more than a field goal. But this Lions offense has been very tough to play against. They scored 24 points on the road against Minnesota, and their first half offensively was unbelievable. They had those 14 points, 226 yards of offense in that game. And DeAndre Swift, unfortunately, was banged up in that one. He is questionable for this game, but Jamal Williams is a very good backup running back. He's been able to step it up when they've needed him in the past, whether he was on the Lions or the Packers when Aaron Jones went down. But he's a fine backup running back. I think he'll be just fine with this really good Detroit Lions offensive line, who's only given up 4 sacks on the season. Only 3.6% of Jared Goff's passing attempts have ended in a sack. That's one of the best totals in the league right now, and they're moving the ball on the ground. Their passing game has been very good. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown is also questionable for this game. He is a big piece of this offense, but I still think the Lions have enough firepower to put up plenty of points on a pretty weak Seahawks defense. Now, on the other side, unfortunately for Detroit, their defense has not been good this year, and I don't think it's going to improve much as the season continues. They're getting torched in the secondary quite a bit. Kirk Cousins had his way in the second half of that game in that big comeback victory, and I do think, even though the Seahawks offense isn't the most potent offensively in the league, I still think they're going to be able to move the ball like they did last week against the Falcons and put up 21, 24 points in this game to get this total over the number. So give me the over in this Lions-Seahawks ballgame. Next up, we see the Tennessee Titans taking on the Indianapolis Colts. We see the Colts as a small favorite, total set at 42.5 points. Now, on our live shows, we always like to make the joke that if you don't like a game, you can take a Ruffalo. Chris Ruffalo is one of our handicappers here, and one day he took a pass in a game, and now the Ruffalo is one of the more well-known terms here at Pick Dawgz, and this would be the type of game that I would take a Ruffalo on. I don't like this game at all. I think the line is right on where I would put it. The Colts as the 3-point favorites, 3.5-point favorites at home. home. The total, I do think there's a little bit of value on the under because the Colts offense really wasn't that impressive last week. They still haven't really been able to get the ground game going, which is really surprising to me as Jonathan Taylor's one of the best running backs in the league. And this is one of the better offensive lines on paper in the league. So to be held to 54 total rushing yards in Jacksonville and then 82 against the Chiefs, that does concern me quite a bit. I don't really love Matt Ryan. He's been sacked 10 times in the last 2 weeks. So I don't love this offense, but the defense won the game for the Colts against the Chiefs last week. They held Kansas City to 2.5 yards per carry. Patrick Mahomes didn't do too much damage in that game, which is never easy. And I do think the Colts defense steps it up in this one as well. I think we see a low-scoring game. The Titans offense has been inconsistent themselves this season. Last week, it was definitely their best performance of the year, but I'm not ready to be too big of a believer in them quite yet. So give me the under in this Colts-Titans ball game. Next up, we see the Philadelphia Eagles hosting the Jacksonville Jaguars. We're going to see the Eagles as 6.5-point favorites, and the total set at 47.5. Now, when you look at the Philadelphia Eagles, this is one of the more talked about teams right now in the NFC as potential Super Bowl contenders. And you look at the Eagles defensively, tenacious, 9 sacks earned last week against the Commanders, forcing turnovers left and right, especially in that Monday Night Football game against Kirk Cousins. The Vikings offense, a pretty good offense, wasn't able to do much of anything. Offensively, Jalen Hurts has been incredible this season. They're moving the ball through the air. They're moving the ball on the ground. They're earning over 400 total yards of offense in each of their first 3 games, averaging 29 points per game in the first 3 weeks. So it looks like maybe they're just going to steamroll the Jaguars in this game as well. But I say not so fast. Look at this Jaguars team in the last 2 weeks of the season, playing the Colts and the Chargers, 1 game at home, 1 game on the road. 2 teams that are pretty good last season. They outscored them 62-10 combined, 24-0 over the Colts in week 2, holding them to 218 total yards of offense. I know Michael Pittman was out for that game, and the Colts were out their top 2 receivers in that game overall. It doesn't matter. This Jaguars defense was unbelievable in that game, forcing 5 sacks, not letting Matt Ryan do much of anything. The same Colts team, the same Matt Ryan that just beat the Chiefs last week. You look at the Jaguars against the Chargers, 38-10, a blowout, wasn't close for a second. 400 total yards of offense. They were moving the ball through the air like it was nothing. 262 passing yards for Trevor Lawrence in that game. It was a dominant showing for the Jaguars. They're forcing turnovers. They're playing with some confidence now, and they're going into Philadelphia as the underdogs. And not a lot of people are talking about this Jaguars team, but I think they keep this game close, if not have a chance to win it outright. Give me the Jaguars and the points in this one on the road. Next up, we see the New York Jets taking on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Jets are expected to get Zach Wilson back for this game, but I don't think it's enough for this offense to be really effective in this one. We've seen their offensive line really struggle this season. They're not running the football under 100 rushing yards per game in each of the first 3 weeks. They're taking a lot of sacks, including last week, 4 sacks allowed. And this Steelers defense last year and this year has struggled against the run. Last year, they gave up 5 yards per carry. This year, coming off last week, they gave up 171 yards on the ground to the Browns and over 100 in the first 3 weeks. But if the Jets are not able to run the football effectively like they haven't been able to this season, I think the Steelers' defense is going to be in pretty good shape overall. The secondary's been good. They've been able to force some turnovers, especially saw that in week 1 against the Bengals. And when you look at the offense for Pittsburgh, sure, it hasn't been great. That's for sure. Mitchell Trubisky has not been great at quarterback, but they were able to move the ball against the Browns. In the first half, they had 200 yards of offense and 2 touchdowns to show for it. The second half, the offense wasn't as strong, but I do think that there's some signs of life for this team offensively, and I think they're good enough here against the Jets to win this game and cover the spread in the end. Give me the Pittsburgh Steelers laying the points in this one. Next up, we see the Buffalo Bills taking on the Baltimore Ravens. We're going to see the Bills as 3-point favorites and a total set at 52 points. These have been 2 of the more electric offenses in the league this season. The Ravens, 33 points per game, and the Buffalo Bills, 30 points per game. But I do like the Bills defensively a little bit more, even though they've had some injuries in the last few weeks. I do think the Ravens have a lot of issues to worry about in their secondary. They've given up 460 yards through the air against the Dolphins, and then 300 more against the Patriots, who really are not much of a pass-heavy offense. But the Patriots still put up 447 total yards in that game, 26 points, and That was probably their best week of offense this season the Patriots had in that one. So the Bills, we know, very potent offensively. Last week they only had 19 points, but they still had almost 500 total yards of offense. Josh Allen had some issues in that game in terms of the sacks, but he was still 382 yards. They ran the ball about 5 yards per carry. This offense is, I believe, the best offense in the league. I think this is one of the best defenses in the league as well. So I think we're getting, because of the Bills' loss last week and because of the Ravens' win and cover last week, I think we're actually getting some value with the Bills. If the Bills had won that game over Miami, I would expect them to be much larger than a field goal favorite in this game. So I think we're getting some value with the road team. Give me the Bills on the road, laying the points. Next up, we see our final 1 o'clock game of the Sunday card. It's the Los Angeles Chargers and the Houston Texans. Now, the Houston Texans are now 5-point dogs after opening up as a 7-point underdog at home, and I think a lot of that has to deal with the Chargers' injuries on both sides of the ball. We also saw the Chargers struggle quite a bit last week overall, 38-10 in that game, final score against the Jaguars, and the Chargers have not been able to stop the pass the last 2 weeks, 67% now on the season they're allowing to opposing quarterbacks. They have not really been able to get too much pressure on opposing quarterbacks, only 1 sack in the last 2 weeks. And they're not been able to move the ball. The Chargers offense has not been able to move the ball on the ground at all this year. Under 100 rushing yards in each of the first 3 weeks. Now, they don't run the football a ton these days, but still, to have 2.6 yards per carry when you've got Austin Eckler and Sony Michel as your running backs in the backfield, not what you want to see. Now, the pass protection has been good. They have been able to get their throws off. They've only been sacked 2.4% of passing attempts, but the offense still has some issues. The defense is banged up and struggling in the secondary, and the Texans, this is not a great team on paper, but I do think that they can keep this game close at home. They were able to do so against the Colts in week 1. Their home field advantage is a little bit underrated, in my opinion, in the league compared to some other teams, and I think that they can compete in this one and keep this game within a field goal. So give me the Houston Texans plus the 5 points in this one. Next up, we see the Arizona Cardinals taking on the Carolina Panthers. Now, I think this game sets up for the best performance we've seen Baker Mayfield and this Panthers offense have this season, as I do think Baker will have plenty of time in the pocket, and that's an important thing for him. He hasn't really had too much time in the pocket this season, as the Panthers have allowed 11.1% of passing attempts to end in a sack. So, that's not what you want to see, but Arizona has not gotten virtually any pressure on opposing QBs this season. They had 0 sacks week 1, 1 sack week 2, 1 sack week 3. That's 1.9% of opponents' passing attempts ending in a sack. That's just not going to get it done in the NFL. Their rush defense hasn't been good enough, giving up 4.5 yards per carry. And I think this is going to be the best week we've seen from this Panthers offense. We know the Panthers defense has been solid. Last week it was good against the Saints. It was pretty good against the Giants the week before. It wasn't too bad against the Browns in the second half in week 1. So I do think that this is going to be the better performance we've seen from Carolina's offense. I think that's enough for them to win this game in the end, especially at home. So give me the Carolina Panthers on the money line. Next up, we see the New England Patriots taking on the Green Bay Packers. We're going to see the Packers as 10-point favorites in this one. And when you look at the Dallas Cowboys, week 1, Dak Prescott goes down with the injury. Cooper Rush takes over week 2 as starting quarterback. The look-ahead line for that game when Dak was not injured, it was 2.5-point favorites for the Cowboys. He goes down with the injury. Cooper Rush is at quarterback. Now the Cowboys are 7.5-point underdogs against the Bengals. We took the points. We said that's just too much of a line move for one player, even the quarterback, even a really good quarterback like Dak Prescott, and the Cowboys won the game outright. Now you got New England. They're not going to have Mac Jones in this game. He's injured for quite some time. You got Brian Hoyer as the backup, going to be the replacement for this game and going forward. Now, Brian Hoyer, I think, is a better quarterback, in my opinion, than Cooper Rush is. He's more experienced. And still, this line has moved 3.5 points in Green Bay's direction. I think there's too many points to move. Mac Jones really hasn't had that much of a great season so far. I think there's just too many points in the direction for Green Bay right now. I think there's some value for New England now. I don't think the Patriots win this game outright like the Cowboys did in that one, especially on the road, but I still think they can cover this spread. The total set very low at 40.5, so you're getting a good amount of the line of the total right now in that line at plus 10. So give me the New England Patriots plus the 10 points. Just going to go with my backup quarterback system in this one. Next up, we see the Denver Broncos taking on the Las Vegas Raiders. Now, the Raiders are 2.5-point favorites and a total set at 45.5. Now, I know not a lot of people are going to be looking at the over in this game when you look at how bad the offense performed in Sunday Night Football for Denver, putting up 11 points, and it was a very low-scoring game, defensive first kind of game in that one. But I actually like the over in this game for quite a few reasons. When you look at both of these teams, when it comes to running the football, they haven't really been doing too much of that this year. Both teams have been throwing the ball at least 30 times per game in each of their first 3 weeks, and the Broncos about 4.2 yards per carry, not too shabby, but still not great. The Raiders under 100 rushing yards per game as a team in each of the first 3 weeks. So both teams, I do expect them to be throwing the football quite a bit. Passing attempts are very good for overs. Obviously, you can move the ball through the air a lot more than you can move it on the ground in terms of yards per play, and you can also stop the clock with an incomplete pass. So I do like when teams are going to be throwing the football quite a bit. I do look at the over, and when you look at both of these defenses, the Broncos very good against the run this season, under 100 rushing yards allowed per game, so that does set up yet again for the Raiders to throw the football quite a bit. I mean, when you got Devontae Adams as your number one wide receiver, who I believe is the best receiver in football, you should be throwing the ball quite a bit, and I do think Derek Carr is a better quarterback than what we've seen so far, and I do think he has a pretty good game in this one. Now, on the other side, Denver Broncos, Russell Wilson, one of the better quarterbacks going into the season on paper, hasn't really produced quite yet with his new team, but he still has the weapons, and he still, I believe, is a talented quarterback overall. Now, again, when you look at the Las Vegas Raiders, 69.1% completion percentage allowed to opposing quarterbacks. They're getting torched in the secondary last week, including 19-27 from Ryan Tannehill in that game. And they're also, the Raiders, not really getting much pressure on opposing quarterbacks. Only 2 sacks this season overall. Just 2. 1.8% of opposing quarterback passing attempts have ended in a sack. So Russell Wilson should have a ton of time in the pocket in this game. Something he didn't have a lot of last week. He got sacked 4 times. He was rolling out quite a bit. And I do think he'll have a lot more time in the pocket and have better throws overall in this game. And I think the Broncos offense has a much sharper performance in this one. Maybe their best performance of the season, as they've been held to 16 points, 16 points, and 11 points. I think they get to 20 plus for sure in this one. I think the Raiders do as well. And I like the over in this 4 o'clock game between the Broncos and Raiders. Next up, our Sunday Night Football contest on NBC. It's the Kansas City Chiefs and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, right now, this game's going to be played at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa on Sunday, but it could be moved to either a later date or even a different location because of Hurricane Ian. My thoughts are with all you Floridians. Hopefully you guys stay safe during this storm. Now, if the Buccaneers do have to move this game, I do think that the line certainly will change, and we'll have to wait and see where that game's going to be played. But this Buccaneers offense has struggled this season. The last 2 weeks, under 300 total yards of offense against Green Bay, really didn't move the football much at all. In the later part of that game, they were able to and make the game interesting, get that touchdown to try to get the 2-point conversion. But overall, they haven't been able to run the football. Tom Brady hasn't had his best start to the season, that's for sure. The offensive line also is a little bit banged up. So, I do think this is going to be another lower scoring game. The Buccaneers defense has been strong this season. Yet again last week, holding Green Bay to 14 points. Aaron Rodgers holding them to 14 points is never an easy thing to do. And their rush defense has been great, holding teams about 3.8 yards per carry and 80 yards per game on the ground. The secondary's been good enough. They're getting pressure on opposing quarterbacks. I think they'll be able to hold Patrick Mahomes down just a little bit, enough to keep this game under the total. And we can't, I know a lot is said about the Chiefs and their offense with Mahomes at quarterback and Travis Kelce, one of the more talented players in the league offensively. But this defense is still very, very good for Kansas City going into this season. And you look at the first 3 weeks, they're holding teams to about 3.6 yards per carry and only 87 yards on the ground. The secondary has been inconsistent, but they're earning some sacks. They're getting some pressure on opposing QBs. And overall, I do think this is going to be a defensive game. We've seen quite a bit of unders in primetime games this season. I think we see another one in this one. Give me the under in this Chiefs-Buccaneers game. In our final game of the week, we see your Monday Night Football contest between the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers. Now, I know they say life's too short to bet the under, but I am going to have to take another under in a primetime game here between these two. I just think both of these defenses are in much better shape than the offenses. You look at the 49ers, they only had 10 points last week. Jimmy G recreated Dan Orlovsky's safety in the back of the end zone going out of bounds, and honestly was good for him as he was going to throw a pick 6 on that play if he didn't go out of bounds. But Jimmy G has not looked great at quarterback, at least last week, and the ground game hasn't really done too much. I don't really love this Niners offense outlook going into this week, and the Rams defensively have really been good lately, holding teams to about 3.3 yards per carry in the last 2 weeks. The secondary's been inconsistent, but getting better, and overall they're holding teams at about 23 points per game. That's solid enough. I think they have a good defensive showing, but when you look at the Rams offensively, last year one of the more explosive, electric offenses in the NFL, Cooper Kupp had about 50 catches for 200 yards every game, it seems, but this year, Stafford, 72.5% completion percentage. Very, very good. 4 to 5 touchdown and interception ratio. Not great, obviously. The yards per game through the air, not great. The ground game hasn't been very good. They're held to 20 points per game and 300 total yards per game. It's not where I want to see this Rams offense. And when you look at how good that Niners defense has been, now they face some pretty weak offenses. The Bears, the Seahawks, and the Broncos, 3 teams that are well below in terms of average and in terms of offensive points per game, total yards per game. But the Niners still holding teams at 2.8 yards per carry. The secondary holding teams to under 200 total yards per game. Getting some sacks. About 9.9% of opposing teams' passing attempts have ended in a sack. This Niners defense has been one of the best in the NFC. So this game sets up to be another low-scoring contest. Give me the under in the Rams-Niners game to end the night and to end the week. And that's it. Those are the games for Week 4 of the NFL season. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to smash that like button and subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to put your football plays in the comments section below. If you're looking for my best bets, you can find those at Pick Dawgz Premium. As always, this is Ron Romanelli. Good luck.